I'm terribly sorry, I've got the Mac one. Just bear with me while I get it. You want the Mac one? I want the Mac. You want the Mac?
Right. The city in pieces, building neighbourhoods. Like it or not, we're all citizens on the same planet, and what happens in different parts of the world now affects us quite intimately. What happens and what's happened in Christchurch matters a great deal to people elsewhere. You're not alone. And coming from Adelaide, which has got in many ways a similar feel to Christchurch, it really sort of connects at a level that has quite taken me by surprise since I've been here. So we're part of a global family, if you like, even if we're half a world away. And what we know is nothing stands still. Everything moves, the earth moves, and Christchurch is undergoing a crash course in disaster planning and urban reconstruction. What I think is, I'm looking for positives always, and I'm incredibly impressed by the positive energy that I've come across ever since I've been here for the last few days. It's just been phenomenal. What Christchurch is going through now is the sort of thing that cities all over the planet are going to be going through during the next 2 or 3 decades as we hit the wall of global warming that we've been building with fossil fuels. And the lessons that come from the building of the city, the remaking of the city, I think can have enormous impact and incredible relevance to other places. We need to think big. We need to think big, but we do get, you know, this kind of architecture planning scene. It's full of images and slickness and kind of wow, and some of it's really good. We've seen some of that, but some of it's a bit dodgy, and you get these sort of slick facades and all the rest of it. I call it designer porn. Images suppressed. Ever since you could put vegetation on buildings with computers, architects have discovered that you can put vegetation on buildings. Prior to that, it was too hard to draw. And a lot of the images that we see, I think, are really a bit, you know, the green is green, but it's a bit like movie sets where you just got the facade and behind it, there's really not a lot going on. Doing green stuff, doing sustainable anything is really all about how things work, not how they look. How they look, well, who knows? It's going to depend on where it comes from, what it's doing. But if it doesn't work, it's not green. And you get these great pronouncements about how good it all is and all the rest of it. And it's all a bit like the Wizard of Oz working, you know, machinery behind the smoke screen in front. Architecture's always been, the timer's not running. That's hard. Architecture's always had this problem with images and obsessed with images, and one of the earliest images, the classic image of modern city, was provided by this culture here at Le Corbusier. Look at that. If this speaks of anything in terms of human relationships and relationships between people and place, it speaks of relationships that are totally sterile. And look how it kind of narrows in to what? More buildings or roads or something. It's not healthy. Now contrast this with this image by Richard Register, one of the eco-city pioneers. It's not very architectonic, it's certainly not slick, but what it talks about, what this image talks about, is life. You know, there's people in it, there's things going on, and instead of the view narrowing down, it's opening out to the vistas of nature and connecting with the landscape and with the ocean. It's a whole different way of thinking represented in a very different drawing, and that's the direction we kind of need to go. But we're talking about building, everybody's talking about building, and not surprisingly, but we think of buildings in many ways. Buildings serve many purposes. We think of it as a way of creating real estate. I mean, that, unfortunately, tends to be the primary reason people think about buildings. It's monetizing it, I think, is the term people use nowadays. We think of buildings as a way of making shelter. And in our advanced societies, don't we start to think about the way it'll make money before we start to think about how it'll work as shelter? And isn't that a bit strange? We think of buildings as ways of creating objects and places of beauty. At least sometimes we think of buildings as ways of expressing power and strength. And we think of buildings as ways of providing safety and security. All these things that buildings do, we think of them as ways of providing comfort and places of tranquility and grace, and to celebrate the spiritual. All of this is what buildings do. But I think buildings are much more important than that. They're more fundamental than that, even. Buildings are about, well, there's something deeper. Many creatures manipulate their environment to extend their physiology, to make the world more habitable. They breathe where they could not otherwise breathe, stay warm where they would otherwise freeze, stay cool where they'd otherwise be too hot, and reproduce where they otherwise could not. These paper wasps could not recreate, procreate without making their nests, and neither could most birds. And I believe that just as birds must make their nests to survive and further their species, we are. I mean, that's how much what we build is part of who we are. So when buildings get damaged, no wonder it wallops our psyches somewhat, because it's like having a piece of you chopped off or heavily damaged. That's how important buildings are, but we haven't really treated them with that level of seriousness, and I think we should. And we've been building for a long time now. Well, a long time. 10,000 years, let's say, since the beginning of civilization. And over that time, bit by bit, stick by stick, stone by stone, brick by brick, we've transformed the planet. Literally transformed the planet. I drew this in 1973. Some of us could see it coming, but it hasn't helped. And one of the problems with getting vision and having clarity and seeing what's going on is, unless somebody listens to it and acts on it to make changes, you still get what's going to be coming. Now, the entire planet is a manipulated environment. It's an extension of our physiology, but it's through our cities that we manage this manipulation. So cities are incredibly important, and it's through them that we make or break this planet. Ian Douglas, who wrote one of the first and still very good books that stand as a textbook on urban ecology, was published in 1983, wrote, "The urban ecosystem is the most elaborate geographical control system or integrated resource management system in human experience." See, that's what cities are as well. They are incredibly important places. And we've been doing things with a rate of change which has been quite incredible, and yet the tools we've used to do that are pretty much the same, and have been the same for about 10,000 years. Tools. Lewis Mumford, in my understanding of it, defined a tool, I thought, quite well. Tool plus use. People talk about technology all the time. I don't think we define it properly. Technology is tool plus use. So I can take a tool, let's say a hammer, and hammer nails into bits of wood, and I've got myself a creative technology. I can build things and make things, and that's really positive. I can take the exact same tool, that same hammer, and smash somebody's head in. Or I can smash the timer. It becomes a weapon technology. The tool is the same, it hasn't changed, but its use has changed, and the use has changed because of my application of values to the use of that tool. And when we're building cities, we're doing the same kind of thing. So we can make cities that trash the planet, like we have been doing now for rather too long, or we can make cities that start to heal things and create places which are good for people and good for the planet. Cities, as Richard Register would say, that are in balance with nature. And if we do that, and we call them eco-cities, well, those eco-cities need to be not just the kind of the buildings in the middle, they need to be considered with their region, with their hinterland, and we could talk about them as an ecopolis, an ecopolis, city plus its region, planned within the context of its bioregion, where it resides as a regenerative force. And that's something else, another way to think about what's going to be happening to Christchurch. It's not just regenerating or restoring something of what was there. It's to do with putting in place a revised city which is about regenerating the region and making it healthy, not just for people, but also for the place. And in terms of eco-city thinking, you start to do this everywhere, and you end up taking the whole planet in the right direction. Understanding cities as ecosystems is absolutely essential. They are living systems. Sometimes they don't work so well, sometimes they could be working a lot better. If we consciously set out to do them, they'll work brilliantly. But they're cultural constructs. Now, culture is a fascinating thing. I guess what we're doing here is kind of cultural. Everything is, actually, when you think about it, because everything is a construct. Cultural fractals I talk about as little pieces of the larger culture so that you can get a connection, a resonance with that larger culture from those smaller pieces. I don't know if you're very familiar with the idea of a fractal, the idea of the small thing which repeats, and you can see the larger pattern containing those small pieces, and those small pieces containing that larger pattern. So I also then suggest that an urban fractal is the smallest part of an urban system that possesses enough of its essential characteristics to define the larger city. It's a kind of cultural fractal. The essential characteristics in those fractals are about patterns of relationship, which is essentially then about community. Consider meeting people. There's a couple of ways. 6 kilometers per hour or at 60 kilometers per hour. Is anybody here up for meeting somebody at 60 kilometers per hour? Head on? No. So if you're going to create fractals as the basis for your planning, which is what I'm suggesting you do, then you say, what are these fractals going to be like? What are their characteristics going to be? Well, one of the primary things in city making is it's a place for people to meet in all sorts of ways. To meet, to exchange goods, services, ideas. And you've experienced that. I think you've rediscovered in many ways here in Christchurch the fundamental meaning of that. Well, if you're going to continue to build and rebuild and remake your city, it's going to be a good place to meet people. If it's going to be a good place to meet people, you're not going to be doing it at 60 kilometers per hour. How about doing it on a roof? This is a roof garden, a Christie Walker project that I've been involved with since its inception. It's in the centre of Adelaide. It's right in the middle of the city. This is 3 stories high. It's a housing project that we initiated. As a community, there was no developer involved, no government money involved, and we said, let's do a little piece of Eco-City anyway, somehow. And I've often said that when the project started, I was 6 foot tall. Community is part of the urban fractal concept. The urban fractals that contain the patterns and processes of eco-cities catalyze development of the urban fractals that contain, you get the idea, the ongoingness is important. That has to kind of reinforce and build. And oh, is that really the time? I'm going to skip that a little bit, and you can have different kinds of cities, understanding how cities work. The classical, very centralized, the grid, which is very expedient, which is the suburbs, if you like. The organic city, which is what we tend not to have in the new worlds because we're too young. And the most successful cities tend to combine all those tendencies. And they combine them in ways which produce different characteristics. The patterns of relationships are to do that you really have to get right, and I've heard this in many different ways now today, are to do with community. And so a successful community requires active participation by citizens in making and managing the buildings and social structures of the successful. You get the idea. And it's been done, and it's no accident that the scale of the village and the neighbourhood and the tribe are all very much of the same are so similar. So community is important, and it's much more important than any thoughts about technology as to how we make our future. Future generations need much more than technical fixes to get through the mess that we've left them, and that's without having earthquakes. It's a major problem everywhere. You've got to see the whole thing in terms of living systems. That's what we did with the Christie Walk project, which is an example of a little neighbourhood that's in the middle of the city that's been done entirely along the lines of community first and sustainability first, together. In the US, Ross Chapin is pioneering putting real community back into real estate with what he calls pocket neighbourhoods. This idea that you can have places that are safe for kids to run free range. You design to enable that. It doesn't happen by accident, unlike so much what our cities come out like. It creates small-scale community in a large-scale world. And if you do it this way, those communities are each going to have their story to tell and their own music to play. And it's those collection of communities that make ultimately the whole city. And these pocket neighborhoods you can get even in the very urban, very dense environment of Christie Walk, because here we got a pocket neighborhood, people sitting out in the sun. It's in the middle of the city, and it's very convivial. And you go to Christie Walk, you can often find people, if the weather's half good, outside sharing wine, tea, whatever, with each other. It can be done. It can be done. Christie Walk's high density. It's high density, but it is not high rise. So you can start to get that intensity. You need a certain degree of density and intensity to have good community, because we need to bump into people, we need to meet them, we need to interact with them. And yes, you can do that on Skype and all the rest of it, but it is absolutely not the same, as you all know, as meeting people face to face. And the only way you get accidental meetings with people, which create a real tapestry that we want in life, is through having environments where it's easy to do that. So Christie Walk offers a small example of what's possible. It kind of ticks off all the sweet spots in terms of sustainability, and I'm illustrating it because there aren't many examples like it. And when people talk about what could be done, can we really do it, is sustainability possible, la la la, what about community? Well, yeah, look, we did it in Adelaide, in a place which has got a not dissimilar kind of culture and feel to Christchurch. In fact, we're sister cities, for I think very good reasons. So Christie Walk has got all these things embedded in it, and around this very small place, you're looking on the roof garden, look to the north, to the south, run through pedestrian pathways. All of this is creating safe places for people to live, and yet it's still very urban. It's a 5-story apartment building facing one of the city's main streets. 27 dwellings, 2,000 square metres, and 700 square metres of vegetation where previously there was basically none. These things can be done. So do believe in the possibility, not just as abstract concepts out there somewhere, but as things which are applicable, real, and available to you. Think small, though. Now I think big. Actually, to deal with the big picture, to deal with big things, we have, I believe, to think small. You have to work at the level you can operate. And that's how we achieve sustainable modern architecture and living landscapes, and form regenerative architecture, cities, and living systems. That's what this is all about. I'm calling them small fractals to try and give you a hook to hang on to. It's only a very small part of what we need to do all together. And part of what we need to do all together is, the point is, that's how you put together a city, in pieces. It doesn't go boom like that. You have to do it bit by bit. But all those pieces must relate to each other, must have integrity within themselves, and that integrity must be then reflected in all the other pieces. And then one day you turn around and you've got your eco-city. I think Christchurch can lead the world with this stuff, and all along you have to take care of restoring land and waterways that repair ecosystems, etc., etc., etc. You get the idea. I'll leave the last word with a terrific writer on cities and technology, Lewis Mumford, writing over half a century ago. He said, the entire planet is becoming a village, and as a result, the smallest neighbourhood or precinct must be planned as a working model of the larger world. Do that, and not only will Christchurch end up with an incredible example, I think, of the way cities should be for the future, but because of setting that example, you have the opportunity through that to bring in people, bring in tourism, bring in business that is people learning about how to do it. So Christchurch, I really believe, has an incredible opportunity to lead the world in a very literal way towards the sort of development of cities that we need for a sustainable future.